We are back with another episode of the Sky Society podcast, and my guest today is Sarah Boutin. She's the Senior Director of Global Copy and Story at Benefit Cosmetics. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to share your story with us. I'm super excited to dive on in, but before I do all of that, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So, hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I lead the global copy and story team at Benefit Cosmetics. If you've been in a Sephora or an Ulta lately, or basically in any country around the world, you've probably seen our products. But in a nutshell, my team is responsible for all of the copy, the words, the voice of the brand. So that incorporates everything from a product name to what's written on the product packaging, to what's written on in-store signage, online campaigns, posters, and that incorporates products, services, brand story, and so much more.
Yes, copywriting is immensely a broad umbrella term, I think, and so much stuff goes under it, which you just touched on. So I'm excited that we're going to get to talk about all of those things. But what's also interesting about your story, Sarah, is that you started at Benefit Cosmetics way back when you graduated college. So you, in between where you are now and when you started, you worked at Bare Minerals, Visa, Salesforce, so many different places. But can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to go into beauty and in copywriting? I know your degree from UCLA was in art history. So why did you decide to make that move after college?
Yes. Honestly, it was purely by chance. I graduated with a degree in history. I knew I liked to write, but I had no clue what I wanted to do for my career. And honestly, I just wanted and needed a job. So I was applying to all types of jobs, some that involved writing and some didn't, jobs all across the country. I think a lot of people can relate to the fact that can be hard to get your foot in the door and you really get that first, corporate job. So I was casting a very wide net, but I saw this job advertised for Benefit Cosmetics as a junior copywriter. And at the time I had no idea what copywriting was. I was like, is this something to do with legal trademarking? I had to really figure it out and read the job description. But honestly, it sounded like a dream job. It was writing the benefit catalog at the time and helping with product naming and product messaging. And lo and behold, I was able to get that job. And, there's no way to learn a craft other than just diving in and doing it. So I feel like my writing skills did translate, but I learned a lot, on the ground once I got started.
I know this is such a long time ago, so it's okay if you don't remember, but I'm curious at that time, did you have a portfolio of writing work that you presented, or because I know your background wasn't exactly in marketing to start?
Yes, that's a great question. I did. I had a few internships when I was in school, writing for different websites and blogs. And I used those, excerpts from my time there as writing samples, but also was prepared to, fill out writing tests. Or I think I also wrote a more creative cover letter, just was kind of looking for anything I could do at the time to show that, I had the skills to get the job done well.
Okay. I love that, just because I know when you're starting out in your career, you don't have a lot of experience. Portfolios and sample work are such a great way to show that you can be a really good fit for the role, even if you're fresh out of college and you don't meet all the qualifications right off the bat.
Yes. And I think even if you don't have, specific internships that will lend you the opportunity to create the work that you'd like to show, you can always, create work on your own. I think whether that's writing, whether that's designing, there's a lot of places you can build your own website for free and with, very minimal technological background, in which you can, write blog posts about what you're passionate about, or, design or commentary on different types of marketing. You can really just kind of go for it yourself and at least have something to show, prospective employers.
Yeah, and I think copywriting is such a great place, or copy in general in marketing, to you can so easily just go and create your own blog and get a ton of experience on your own. You don't have to wait for that internship opportunity. So I think that's a really great thing there that you did of having all those writing samples. All right. So at this role, so maybe you didn't know exactly if, what you want to do at a college. You got this incredible copywriting role at Benefit. What kind of clicked for you that was like, this is the career that I want to go into?
I just loved, and I love to this day, the creativity. And I think it really also can depend on the brand, but the ability to write and kind of go very blue sky with your thinking, and especially in an industry as creative and compelling as beauty, I really loved. And there's always a challenge with copywriting to keep your writing very clear and succinct, unlike long form, whether that's writing long articles or journalism. Copywriting, whether it's a product name or a headline on a poster, you really have to keep your writing very tight, which is something I definitely learned to love. So I think it was a combination of the copywriting and the industry that really made me feel excited and fulfilled.
Yes. And clearly the beauty industry was a place that you really liked, because then you went over and you moved on to Bare Minerals as a copywriter. And by the time you left, you were the senior manager of global copy. Can you tell me a little bit about your time there?
Yes, I had a wonderful time at Bare Minerals, and it was doing kind of a very similar type of role of writing about beauty products as well as skincare. And I think there I was able to kind of take everything I learned at Benefit and really take a next step further by beginning to mentor and then manage other writers, and kind of lifting up a little bit to look at different brands, because at the time we had Bare Minerals, we had Buxom, and then we had a Bare Minerals skincare. So it was almost kind of increasing the portfolio of work I was working on and starting to think more strategically about the parent brand as well as the individual brands. So it was a really good opportunity for me to kind of think bigger, and then start applying what I learned to the work of others through managing.
And one of the things that you mentioned to me was that developing a learning mindset throughout your career has always been really important to you, from every manager, every experience, every failure. Well, how did that learning mindset help you throughout these, two really big roles that started your career? And what did you learn about yourself during this time?
Honestly, I feel like I wasn't as intentional about learning earlier in my career. And honestly, I wish I had been. It's something I discovered later. I feel like I was just kind of in go mode and, doing my best. But I think early on in my career, I would definitely get more stressed and upset with failures, and kind of took things more personally. Whereas now I feel like I've kind of been able to get to a place where, of course, I think everyone listening to this podcast cares about their work and cares about their career. So it's not that, I can't get stressed or upset. Of course, I think that happens to all of us, but I feel like I've gotten to a place where I can more intentionally think about whether things go well or don't go well, whether that's, on the job when you're applying, even whether you're picking the right job for you or not. What can I learn from this experience, and how can I apply that learning to the next experience? It can be, the biggest thing of, was this a great email that got received well? Or, it could be as big as, some huge presentation. Just kind of starting to consciously think about, why did this go well, or why didn't this go well, and what can I learn from the experience. And I also feel like there's so much you can learn from the people you work with, and I learned so much starting, from my very first day at Benefit through to now, and I know I'll continue to learn. And something that's helped me is actually going through the exercise of writing down, from, it could be managers you've had, it could be people you look up to, whether it's in your industry or in your company. It could be even people who are peers. there's really kind of no people from, all ages and all different stages in their careers can really teach you a lot. So there was at one point I sat down with a notebook and I listed out every manager I've ever had. And then I wrote down in bullet points things that I admired about them. And then in some cases, also things that maybe I didn't want to bring into my own career. And I think looking at that list really helped me crystallize what, the way I wanted to be as a professional. And, if you can think about listing out people and things you admire about them, if you keep seeing like, oh, I tend to really admire the fact that these different people are great presenters, or that they're really nice to everyone in the office, or that they write super clear emails. Like once you start seeing those things, especially if it's written, you can tell, okay, these are skills that I'd like to have, or these are traits I'd like to work on. And I think that can really help you become the best version of yourself in your career.
What an incredible exercise. I love that. So going through thinking of anyone that's come across in your career who you admire in some way, writing out why you admire them, and then maybe if there's things you notice about them qualities you don't want to take with you, writing those out too. And then maybe connecting the dots and kind of saying like, oh, I feel like for me, something that I always admired was people who were brave enough to speak up in meetings. I was like, oh, I always wish that I would be like bold enough to speak up and be okay if my idea got rejected. And so I think that is such an amazing exercise.
Yes. And I love that example, Natalie, because once you see, okay, I admire people who speak up in meetings. Well, then what's the next step? It can be a little hard to kind of put that, once you have these kind of crystallized thoughts, how do you actually put them into action? And I feel like the best way is to start really small. So I think, and I definitely didn't start my career as someone who always spoke up in meetings. That's something I've definitely had to practice, but it can even be as small as, okay, I have a meeting coming up. I'm going to make sure I say at least one thing, like just starting really small. Or in my next presentation, I'm going to practice the night before and, look at my notes so that I can give it a better go. Or I'm going to sign up for a presentation skills class this year so I can really try to hone these skills. Like, I feel like it can be daunting to say, I want to be just like this, exceptional leader. But when you break it down into these, what are these little steps I can take? The little steps will add up to, then you being where you want to be.
Yes, such a good point of, okay, what are the middle things in between them? And like, let me check those off first before I hold myself to now just, suddenly like this, I'm going to be like all those people I admire. Unfortunately, it doesn't come that quickly or easily.
Exactly.
Okay, Sarah. So you had these two incredible copywriting jobs at two different beauty companies, and then you made a very interesting switch into tech over at Salesforce, where you weren't just doing copywriting, but you were also doing culture. So you were the manager of culture, content, and communications. Can you tell me why you decided to transition out of the beauty industry and take on this new role?
Sure. Honestly, the Bay Area is a very tech-focused place, as I'm sure many of our listeners know. And the tech industry was always around me. I had so many friends in tech. My boyfriend, who's now my husband, has always been in tech. So it was always kind of on the periphery, but I never really thought it was for me. I was like, I'm a beauty gal. I do retail, product, and, I'm not sure I have any real business being in technology. But then I did see one job posted, and the title of the job was #DreamJobStoryteller. And I took one look and I was like, okay, what is this? This sounds kind of like a mystical, magical role. And once I, read the job description, I realized it was a job that was basically crafting the story of what it's like to work at Salesforce, which is a large B2B technology company. And it was writing all about the people, the environment, the benefits. and kind of explaining to candidates why this is a great place to work and why you should consider a job here, at all types of various touch points along the candidate journey. And although I knew nothing about tech or Salesforce or software, and I didn't really know anything about communications or employer branding at the time, I did know I can write and I can tell these types of stories. I just have to kind of learn how to connect all the dots. So I applied and, studied up. And I remember I had to lead in my interview a group exercise, a group brainstorm about an employer brand campaign with a team of, I think, 6 or 7. So it was a little bit daunting, especially because I was very new to the industry, but I figured, why not take a risk, take a chance? This could be a really cool place to take my career and learn. And I ended up being at Salesforce for 5 years and learned a ton and made incredible friends. So I do feel like just because you've started out in one industry or doing one thing doesn't mean you can't mix it up. It doesn't mean your skills can't transfer, whether that's writing, whether that's honestly any area of marketing. So many different companies and industries have marketing. It's hugely, hugely important. So, if you ever feel like you've been doing something for a while, but you'd like to try something new, even if it's completely foreign, there's an excellent chance that your skills could translate and you can pick it up. And maybe that will end up being, the place you fall in love.
That's beautiful. I think that's such great advice that we often forget about, of just once like you are in one place, one niche, one industry, it's hard to go outside of that because you feel really comfortable there because you're good at it.
Right.
But I think taking that challenge, like you literally did everything, even different type of coffee, different industry, that also probably allows you to grow and develop your skills in a way that you wouldn't have been able to if you just would have went to another beauty company right away.
For sure. And to be honest, that whole first year I was at Salesforce, I did not feel comfortable. I did not feel confident in what I was doing. I kept thinking this is a mistake. I shouldn't be doing this. It's not right for me, or, doubting myself. And I was trying, but I honestly kept thinking like, okay, I'll stay here for a year and then I'll go back to beauty or do something else. And it took a while to build my confidence up. And, of course, looking back, it's like, that's natural. This is something you've never done before. But when you're in it, I think some of us really want to be great right from the beginning. And, a lot of the time that's not realistic. So I would say, it's okay to feel uncomfortable for a while. A lot of the time when you're learning something new, it's not going to come naturally right away. You're not going to just jump in and be an all-star or, an Olympian. You have to kind of practice and work your way there. Because, after that first year, I stayed and I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, it's okay if it doesn't click immediately.
Exactly. Like give yourself grace and time.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious to hear is first of all, I know that the Salesforce office in San Francisco is like a dream. I've heard amazing things about it.
Yes, it's incredible. And you can basically see it from anywhere in the city. Like I can look out my window and see it right now. It's so high up. But yes, it's very cool.
Yeah, they're like the perks there are insane. But there's a ton of like the beauty marketing industry is very glamorized. Like 90% of women that talk to me want to work in beauty or fashion marketing. That's where every girl wants to work. In reality, very few of them actually end up in that space. But from your perspective, having worked in both, I don't know if the question is like, is it as glamorous? I guess, is it as glamorous as we often think it to be in our heads? Or what was the difference of you working in the beauty space where, you're actually using all of the products when maybe you're not necessarily using Salesforce all the time?
That's a great question. I mean, I feel like, there's incredible perks and, so much to love about both industries and companies. I do think beauty, from what I hear, is different from fashion. So I don't know if I can speak to
Yeah.
fashion. In my head, it seems very
I'm
glamorous as
sure it's very
well.
different. Yes. But they're just these things when you're young and you're like, that is the dream. I want to work for the makeup company that I wear every day on my face.
Right. And I feel like a big part of the difference is that I am so passionate about beauty, and, I am a product junkie, and I love learning about skincare and, watching TikTok tutorials. So I feel like just that connection, lends, so much to being very fulfilled in my career at Benefit. Of course, there are wonderful perks, and the perks just look different, I would say, from, being at Benefit versus Salesforce. I wouldn't say one's better than the other. And I know every company has kind of its own culture and, its own benefits. So I do think, when you're considering where to work, it's important to look at those things. But ultimately, I think the most important thing to drive your happiness is, will I like the people? Will I like what I'm doing every day? Do I believe in the company?
I'm really glad you said that, because I'm always on a mission of like, you can be happy outside of beauty. It doesn't need to be fashion or beauty for you to be happy at your job. It's the circumstances, exactly what you said. It's the people that you work with, it's your environment, it's all of those things.
Absolutely. And I loved my time at Salesforce. Yes, it's software, but, I made incredible friends. I had so much fun. And I learned a ton and got to travel a little bit. So I do think, it's good to expand in your mind, the type of work you'd be happy in, because there's probably a lot more places you'd be happy in, than you think.
Yes, I'm so happy you said that. I love it. Amazing. Okay. You were at Salesforce for a very significant amount of time. I think you said almost 5 years, right? And then you switched over and you were at Visa for just a little bit as the director of global employer brand communications. Can you tell me about your time there?
Yes. So this, I feel like, was a great learning opportunity, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier. I left Salesforce for Visa. Again, I feel like after 5 years, I was ready for my next move. And this was a role that was similar, focused on, employer brand communications externally. And, I had been working there for only 3 months when I got a call from my, previous boss at Benefit. And she took me out to coffee and said, Sarah, I'm moving to the East Coast, and I'm moving on to my, the next part of my career journey. And would you be open to coming back to Benefit and leading the team? And my initial response was, no, I just started a new job 3 months ago. Like, I'm barely getting my feet under me. And also at the time, I was pregnant. So I was just like, this is too, I was just like, this is too much. Like, it's almost like my initial reaction was to like cut off the opportunity, because I thought it was the wrong timing. Which of course, the timing was not ideal, but is it ever with anything we do? Usually not. So I was like, I don't know, I'm brand new, I'm pregnant, I'm going to go on leave at the end of the year. It's just not a good time. And she said, well, why don't you just come in and, meet with the leadership team and just see, couldn't hurt. Right. And I said, okay, fine. It couldn't hurt. And then I feel like the second I walked back into the office and, was talking with everyone at Benefit, I just knew, this is where I wanted to be. So I did end up coming back. I started 2 months before I went on maternity leave. So I come in, hi, meet the team. I have this huge belly. I'm waddling around. Then I immediately have to go out. It definitely wasn't ideal, but I think, something you can learn, or something I learned and hopefully others can learn from, is, often things don't happen at the perfect time. And that doesn't mean, whenever opportunities do arise, you shouldn't really think about them, because, life can kind of flex around timing. So I think, be open when it comes to that. And also, I think if you are in a situation, whether it's a career or a project or a team, and it's really just not for you, and you can just feel it, and you know there's something else you want to be doing, I would say trust that intuition. I feel like there was no benefit at the time for me just saying, well, I started a job here. I need to stay here for like 3 years just because I started. We only get one life. And if something is just not for you or it isn't the right fit, and you find something that is, I would encourage you to really go for it.
I love that. And I think that that time thing is definitely always in the back of people's heads. I think of like, oh, I can't leave until it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on how far you are in your career. Because I don't want this, red dot or this mark on my career journey. So I love that you said that it's worth having that if you're going to, because you'll be able to perform probably better work and do much better things when you're in a role that you actually like and are passionate about.
Exactly. And I felt the same way. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't have it on my resume that, I was only at a job for 5 months, that looks bad,
Mhm.
or, I'm not that type of person who just jumps around. But honestly, I would say, I know it is harder earlier in your career, but once you've got your feet under you, I do think kind of chucking those rules out the window to do what's right for you, as long as you have something that you're really looking forward to and excited about, will pay off in spades, in the long term.
Yes. Amazing. Okay. Wow, Sarah, I feel like we've gone through so much and we're just now
Oh my gosh, so much. It's like a trip down memory lane over here.
So we're now back full circle with you, starting at benefits right out of college as a little copywriter, and then now back at benefit as the senior director of global copy and story. I know you already touched on your roles and responsibilities a little bit, but how can I ask you, how does it feel looking back? I know I did walk you down memory lane a little bit, but how does it feel like in this new role with all of those experiences that you've had now?
It feels great. I'm really happy and thankful to everyone who has helped me along my career journey. And I feel like the fact that, I do remember and understand what it's like to be at all these different stages. I hope that makes me a better leader and manager because I've been there, and I always keep in mind that, I think in a lot of ways, your manager is or can be very responsible for your happiness at a company. So, that's a huge priority for me. If I want the people on my team to be happy and enjoy what they do and, have a good time in their career, of course, do great work and learn and be proud of what they do, but also, enjoy life. So yes, I think starting, as a junior copywriter and now leading a team of copywriters, I'm always in the back of my mind is like, that is me. And I want to just make the experience as positive as it can possibly be.
So I want to pick your brain a little bit on copywriting. So obviously your entire career has been through copywriting. You've learned so much. What advice would you give someone who's starting out in copywriting? Where can they go to learn? What should they do to practice? How can they become better copywriters?
Sure. Well, I would say it's a fascinating place to be. So I really encourage anyone who's interested in copy to pursue it and look into it. I would say start by just learning. There's some incredible books about copywriting. You can see great examples anywhere you look out in the world. If you open your email, every email that's coming from a brand was written by a copywriter who is writing that email. So start kind of paying attention to what you're seeing out in the world. So subject lines, banners that pop up when you're browsing, on the internet, advertisements. Next time you buy any type of product, it could be a beauty product. It could be, a box of cereal. What's written on that box? Whatever was written on the box is written by a copywriter. So kind of just getting to the mindset of noticing. And of course, you can learn from books and, there are great online courses. I think there's some on LinkedIn Learning, but I think just starting to pay attention. And then you'll start, the more you pay attention, the more you'll start to learn, oh, I like this copy, or, oh, that is some great copy. I feel like, when you're just going about the world and not paying attention very closely, things might be able to you might gloss over them and just say, oh, that's a great ad, or, oh, I really want that pair of shoes. But when you start to dive deeper into the why of, oh, that headline is really funny, or, oh, those few sentences really made me want to click more. You'll start to slowly learn what you like, what you don't like. And then you can kind of start practicing on your own. I think you can give yourself, different exercises, whether it's writing, an ad for a company you'd like to work for, or pretend product names. I think just practicing, writing emails, and then, getting feedback from people around you, will really help you kind of get the ball rolling.
I think that's great advice. And what, like now, think back when you were copywriter straight out of college to you writing copy now, what have you learned that makes you a better copywriter?
Oh my gosh, Natalie, that's a tough question. I think I've learned a lot about just kind of what works and what doesn't work. I know that's very vague. I think some kind of more actionable tips is using language that is easy to read, easy to understand, has a nice flow, and I am very much of the mind of using kind of a positive tone. I mean, benefit, of course, is very positive, but I feel like in general, anything you read, if it has a positive tone, the reader is just going to feel better. And also kind of the power of verbs and active language. So starting bullet points all with a verb, or just using active versus passive language, I think is really important. And this can be in anything you do. This can be in, shooting off an email or your birthday party invitation. I feel like, clear, easy to read, and yeah.
Yeah, I think those are great. I think one question I always ask myself, I learned this from Tim Ferriss, but he always says, after you write something or create anything, like ask yourself, if this were easy, what would it look like? And I think sometimes, even when I'm doing anything, because like I feel like we tend to overcomplicate, want to use more words than we need to, want to use fancier words than are actually necessary. So I love that one there of being easy. And then active to passive, I'm thinking like resume 101, always start your resume bullet points with
Yes,
action
always,
verbs.
always. Yes, I love that one and totally agree. You don't want to make the reader work too hard in general.
Yeah.
No matter what you're reading, people are busy, they're going about their lives. You want to be super quick. And as often as possible, you want, depending on, what you're writing for, I like to always bring a smile to someone's face. So, that helps really color all the copywriting I do. Yep.
Keeping in mind, like, how is someone going to feel when they read this? Not just like,
Yes.
what information are they going to get, or what are they going to learn, or what are they going to want to do, but how is reading this going to make them feel?
Yes. And always, I think kind of the most important thing, even before you're doing the writing yourself and doing, the active voice and the positivity, is thinking about who your audience is. Like, who are you writing to? Who's going to read this? I think that is kind of the baseline that will impact anything you write, whether it's, a college professor reading this, whether it's a customer, whether it's a leader at your company, whether it's your friends. knowing who your audience is kind of the very first, most fundamental step. And then all of that other color and, tips can follow that.
Yes, that one is so important. One of the things I notice a lot with young marketers is that they will always be like, oh, I wouldn't like this, or I would feel this way, or we think of us like as if we're the ones reading it, but in reality you may not be working for a company whose audience demographic is the same as you. And so
Yes.
even with you, there's probably nuances even between benefit and bare minerals of how you're going to write and who you're writing for, even within similar industries or companies.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like when it comes to marketing, no matter what type, what area of marketing you're in, understanding your customer the best way you can, that will help with writing, that'll help with designing, that'll help with campaigns, who your customer is, what they care about, where they are, what they're doing, are they just like walking past, a bus shelter? Are they opening an email from you? Yeah, really kind of taking on the persona of your customer, I think really helps a lot. Or whoever your audience is. I feel like that's when it comes to kind of communications, I feel it's the same as well. Like if I'm sending an email to someone who's a leader at Benefit, I know that they're super busy and they probably get hundreds of emails a day. So I'm going to make mine extremely clear. I'm going to have a very clear subject line that says, what I'm talking about, when I need, do I need a response? If so, by when? And outline it as, succinctly as possible, because I know this leader is probably, on their phone doing a million different things. So always kind of keeping your audience in mind will be kind of hugely beneficial, I think, in any marketer's career.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Sarah, I think that about wraps us up. You have given us so many actionable tips, so thank you so much through each step. I feel like this is such a good episode to take notes on because we talked about so much. I think my last question to wrap it up is, do you have any last advice to share with young marketers?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would say, just to leave everyone, I would say believe in yourself. And I know that can be hard. I definitely, especially earlier in my career, struggled with self-doubt. And I think we probably all, even, up to kind of the highest executives, probably struggle with moments of self-doubt. But I think, it's so important to be your own advocate, market yourself, and be kind to yourself. Everybody makes mistakes. Everyone starts their career somewhere. People don't just like pop from college to be a VP. So I feel like, giving yourself the grace to learn, to fall down, to pick yourself back up, whether that, whether you want to do affirmations or, self pep talks, or just realize, through every experience, you will learn something and you'll continue to grow. And just know that, no matter what it is, if you want to do it and you want to learn, you can and you will. So be kind to yourselves, everyone.
Beautiful. I love that. Well, thank you again, Sarah. It was so much fun chatting with you. And thank you for walking us through your career journey and sharing such great advice. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Natalie.